speaker and Shaykh Arastu, but to bring barakah and blessings to our gathering, we'd like to begin this program with the recitation of some verses from the Holy Quran, beautifully recited by our dear brother McGill Salimani. We welcome him also with the prayer of salam on our beloved Prophet Muhammad and his household. So welcome brother McGill. Allah. Amen.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قد أفلح المؤمنون. الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. والذين هم عن اللغو معرضون. والذين هم للزكاة فاعلون. والذين هم لفروجهم حافظون. إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم فإنهم غير ملومين. فمن ابتغى وراء ذلك فأولئك هم العادون. والذين هم لأماناتهم وعهدهم راعون. والذين هم على صلواتهم يحافظون. أولئك هم الوارثون الذين يرثون الفردوس. الذين يرثون الفردوس هم فيها خالدون. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, certainly will the believers have succeeded. These were the opening ayat, the opening verses of the 23rd chapter of the Holy Quran, beautifully recited by Brother Majid. Thank you very much for your recitation. Shaykh Rizwan Arastu completed all of his schooling in South Carolina and graduated from Ermo High School. He completed his undergraduate studies at Princeton University, where in 1998 he received his bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology, along with minors in Near Eastern Studies and Education. He's also certified in high school and elementary education. He began his Arabic studies at the renowned Middlebury College Intensive Arabic Program while completing his university studies. And it was not until 2000 that his interest in Islamic studies reached fruition, when he headed to Iran to study at the Islamic Seminary. Devoted to his studies, he soon completed all the major texts taught at the Hawza and the disciplines of Arabic morphology, syntax, literature, formal logic, jurisprudence, theology, and philosophy. It was at this point in his career that Shaykh Rizwan turned his full attention towards the study of the Quran and traditions of the Prophet ﷺ and the Imam, peace be upon them all. He memorized much of the Quran and began studying the famous Sunnite exegesis, Tafsir al-Badawi. Privately, Hamidi Ha'iri. This class prepared him to attend the lectures in exegesis of Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, which he did with great interest. He also began a unique study of Wasa'il al-Shi'a and Kitab al-Kafi with Shaykh Dawood Ghaibi and Shaykh Muhsin Ahmadi, two accomplished students of the late Grand Ayatollah Jawad Tabrizi. In 2006, in conjunction with several of his teachers, Shaykh Rizwan Arastu founded the Islamic Text Institute, to which he brings a unique mixture of strong Western and Eastern education. His leadership skills, his intensive study of the Arabic language, and his experience with the exegesis of the Quran and traditions under the tutelage of accomplished teachers make him a vital asset to the work accomplished at this institute, if God wills. It is with honor that we welcome him between ourselves in Montreal, and on behalf of the brothers and sisters, I would like to extend our warmest words of welcome. And without further ado, I welcome him to address us all on the subject of manifestation of Islam in the life of a Muslim. We welcome him with Salam Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. It's a great honor to be here. I'm a little bit worried because I feel like since I've arrived, they've created a hype, at least among the people they're talking to, that this is going to be something spectacular, and it raises the bar so much that I'm really scared that I'm not going to fulfill people's expectations. But inshallah, I benefited a lot from thinking about this topic. So the idea is to speak about manifestations of Islam in a Muslim's life. How does Islam show itself in a Muslim's life? What makes a Muslim distinct from others? What I realize is that we live in a pluralistic society, and we're constantly interacting with people of other faiths. And oftentimes what we do, especially as a minority, one of the mindsets that we have is we kind of tick off certain things that we do that they do. And so we have, they have their Christmas and we have our Eid. They have their Lent and we have our Ramadan and fasting. They have their tithes and we have our zakah and khums. And they have their church and synagogues and we have our mosque. And it's kind of like, it's just one other alternative, and this is just what we do and that's what they do. And it really, we kind of trivialize our own religion to such an extent that it becomes basically one one entree in a kind of a la carte that you can choose from. And it doesn't seem that there's anything distinct about it. It's just something else to choose from another kind of religion, another manifestation of people who believe in God, but nothing really that special. On the contrary, what Islam is, what it claims to be, is it claims to be a comprehensive system for life. It's not something that we can just sequester into one part of our life where we have religion and then we have the rest of our life. That somehow religion just dictates how I relate to God, and it's private and kind of, on my own time, and then the rest of my life has it's not really anything different because I'm a Muslim than if I had been some other follower of some other religion. Right, so Islam it offers a system of life that colors and shapes every aspect of our life, and so if we're doing it right, then a Muslim should manifest aspects of that Islam in all aspects of his life, and it shouldn't just be that he happens to have an Arabic book as opposed to a Hebrew book or an Aramaic book or a Greek book. That he has this holiday instead of that holiday. So what I want to do, let me give you a couple of disclaimers, because I'm not going to talk about those things that are common, right? Because there are definitely aspects to this religion that are in common with other religions, including a belief in a deity, a creator, and all these things, including ethical values. Ethical values are things, even in the Islamic conception, I don't refrain from lying only because God tells me. I refrain from lying because it's common sense. It's a common human value that our intellect itself has the power, a God-given power to understand. We don't need Allah we don't need God to tell us not to lie or not to cheat or to be good to people. Right? We already know to do those things, kind of innately. God comes and He affirms that and shows us how and inspires us to do that. So my point is that that's not a distinct part of Islam. You'll find those same values in other religions, and even atheists have ethical trends amongst them where they try to build a whole kind of a system of ethics that's not based on God. And it's going to look very similar to what Muslims also try to strive for. So I don't want to talk about those things that are common to other religions. I'm also, as I talk about these 5 points that I've chosen to talk about, when I talk about these, I want you to keep in mind these aren't there aren't things that you're necessarily going to see in the life of every single Muslim, right? We're all kind of on a spectrum of our levels of practice and the levels to which we have embodied Islamic ideals. And so I say something and you'll be like, wait, my Muslim neighbor, my Muslim friend, I myself am not like that. Right? These are ideals, these are aspirations, this is what we're striving for. It doesn't necessarily mean that we've already achieved it or every Muslim is going to have these characteristics and these manifestations in his or her life. Right? But that doesn't change the fact that these are ideals and these are ways that Islam should be ideally manifested in Muslim's life. All right, the first manifestation I want to talk about is that a Muslim is guided by his or her intellect. I don't know if that to some people that might seem pretty straightforward. Some people might seem kind of strange, because oftentimes the way religion has become and the way it's characterized is that it's an kind of an irrational or super rational or emotional thing that we do. Right? We have this concept that the Christian world has, I guess, kind of created and inculcated in the rest of our culture, that there's this leap of faith that's necessary for us to get into religion and to believe. Belief actually, it's corrupted to such an extent that belief now is a word that we apply only to those things that we accept as true, despite the fact that there's no evidence for it. Right? In English, in common usage in English, we don't say I believe in. I don't know. I believe I should tell you the truth, or we don't say I believe that it's raining today or it's cold today, because those are things I can know empirically. We say I believe in fairies, or I believe in love, or those kinds of things that are abstract and unprovable, and even sometimes rationally empirically false. That's where we use belief now in common English usage, which is a far cry from what it used to be, and it's a far cry from iman in Arabic, which means to believe in something, to accept something as true, precisely because you have evidence for it, not despite the lack of evidence for it. So the Muslim is guided by his intellect. This dichotomy that we have between science and religion, or between reason and religion, this is also something that's very foreign to Islam. And it's something that's come into our Western culture from the legacy of the Christian church, especially the Catholic Church, and its particular stance as the world was changing into the Enlightenment, and things were moving away from this dogmatic understanding of just things that are told to you and you have to accept them without question, and all of a sudden people started to question. And as empirical sciences started to develop, the Catholic Church had such an entrenched stance against that. The only way it could kind of maintain what it was saying was to have this sort of create a separation between what can be known empirically and rationally and what the Holy Book says. And so they get into this conundrum where they have to basically dismiss the intellect and say, you can't rationally know God. You can't rationally know religion and truth. There's a leap of faith that's necessary to accept God. Right? Reason has no role to play here. And from there we have this gradual separation of these two strains in our society, and we're living this legacy now that sometimes even trickles into our own minds, where we think that there's something. Basically, you can't use reason when you're speaking about religion. That's not at all the case, and Islam doesn't allow for that either. Islam is pushing us to use our intellect, and in fact, the core beliefs that a Muslim lives by are all knowable and provable rationally. We're not expected, and it would be unjust for God to expect that we should accept something as true if there's no evidence to tell us that it's true. And we can't, those first couple of steps that we take into faith, the belief in God and the belief in a particular religion, and those fundamental beliefs that just get our foot into the door of religion, of a particular religion, it would be circular reasoning for God to tell us that there is a God. And I believe that there is a God because God himself has told me that there is a God. Which God is telling me this? I haven't even established that there is a God, and now all of a sudden I'm saying that, well, he said so in this particular book or that particular book that he does exist, therefore he does exist. Right? Rationally, it's not acceptable. So we have to have some way of getting our foot in the door before we open the book, before revelation comes, to first know that yes, there is a God. Then we can go out in the world and look for him and see that he's spoken to us in these ways, and then we can evaluate and say, this particular voice of God, this particular claimant to be a spokesperson for God, this one makes sense, this one doesn't make sense. This one's telling me something that is true, but empirically I can prove that it's false. So this can't be the same God that's created everything. So we can use reason then to establish the existence of God, to establish some of those fundamental principles of faith. And again, there's no need, there's no requirement. In fact, there's no place for a leap of faith at those levels. So that's something I think that's important and distinct from certain other religions. In particular, at least my experience with Christianity, what I know of Christianity, the fundamentalist Christians I've dealt with, even the Catholic Christians I've dealt with. So I know that there are more rationalist strains amongst them, but at least these are the ones that I know, and these are probably the ones that have the most followers as well, and this tends to be a problem they have faced. This intellect also, so the intellect influences us, it helps the Muslim to come to those fundamental beliefs. That intellect also becomes a kind of a governing factor in the Muslim's life, where emotion is now brought under the control of reason. Not pushed out, not silenced, because that's not healthy either. Right? The emotions that we're given are useful. They can be misused as well, but they're also useful, and they've been planted there by the Creator and for a purpose. But they can get out of hand. Right? So, my anger, for instance, if it's misplaced, if it's irrational, if it's reactionary, then it can harm. But that same anger, if it's now guided and focused by intellect, and I first decide what's true and what's false, and when I see falsehood, and especially if it's falsehood that's entrenched and a falsehood that's stubborn and it's not going to go away through other means, then I feel angry towards it, and I focus my well-reasoned anger at that particular falsehood or that particular oppression or whatever that is, and then that motivates me to be able to have the energy to go and do something about it. And not just anger, but the love as well. So if my love is irrational, I fall in love, which is a paradigm that we've been kind of served and to a great extent accepted, then it's an irrational sort of process. There's an attraction of lust, there's an attraction of this and that, and I fall in love. But if I use my reason and I decide that there are certain qualities that I idealize, there's certain qualities that I'm looking for in another person. And I find those qualities in a particular person, and now rationally and reasonably, because this person is the fulfillment of those ideals that I value, now I develop an attraction to that person. I foster love, and I create a sense of love for that person. Now it's a rational, a reasoned love that's positive and that can lead to something good. Another manifestation of this reason is in our decision-making process. Right? So reason, in Arabic is called aql. The intellect is this ability that we have to know things, the faculty that we have to know things, to be able to evaluate pros and cons, and to weigh value versus harm. And so the Muslim also makes decisions not on irrational basis. This is like an ideal. Right? Many of us, or in many aspects, or many times in our life, we fail at this. But this is the ideal that we're striving for, that we make our decisions based on reason. Right? So we actually go in and we seek knowledge, we weigh pros and cons, and then based on those rational factors, then we make a decision that this is in my greater interest or in the greater interest of some greater cause, and that's why I'm going to take this route instead of that route. Right? I'm going to share one tradition from the Prophet ﷺ, where he says that the sleep of one who employs his intellect is better than a fool's vigil. And for one who employs his intellect to remain homebound and sedentary is better than the journeying of a fool in God's service. So the idea here is the Prophet's putting his finger on something that's usually conceived of as useful inherently, which would be, for instance, at least from a religious perspective, praying, staying up during the night and praying. It's a religious practice, kind of having this vigil. Right? So usually we categorically think that's a good thing. And then sleeping during that same time when you could be worshiping, that seems like a pretty useless thing to do. But what the Prophet says is that the sleep of one who employs his intellect is better than the fool's vigil. So if the reason why I choose to sleep instead of staying up to worship is because I've evaluated the pros and cons of each, and I've decided that for certain reasons it's better for me to sleep right now instead of worship, then that sleep for me is better and more beneficial, not only physically, but also in terms of its reward, in terms of the amount to which, or the degree to which it pleases God, than foolishly deciding to worship during that time and then maybe facing certain consequences of yawning during work and yawning during this lecture and not having energy to do those things that are obligatory on me. So it's like if I can't fulfill my worldly obligations, which are in fact godly obligations as well, then I made a foolish choice, which on the surface seems like a good choice, but it's not really. So a rational person is going to choose carefully, and in some cases he or she will choose to do something that might seem to be not the best thing, but because he or she has thought it out well, they realize that's the best option is this, and so they're going to do that. And put aside other options that might on the surface seem to be even better. Alright, so that's one manifestation then. The intellect manifests itself, and the Muslim ideally acts, believes and acts according to the dictates of his or her intellect. Okay, another manifestation I want to talk about is that a Muslim is certain of his path, but uncertain of his ability to fulfill and kind of live up to that path. Right? So a Muslim is certain of his path because he's come to that path through his intellect. Right? So he's used his intellect, he's looked at the evidence, and based on the evidence he's chosen a particular path to traverse. However, that's common sense. But the important part is the second part, that this Muslim, even though she knows that this is the right path to take, this is the way I'm supposed to live, these are the things I'm supposed to do, the Muslim should constantly be uncertain, and it's this healthy kind of uncertainty as to whether or not he has lived up to that, whether he has fulfilled his obligation in following this particular path. I remember having discussions in college with my fundamentalist Christian friends. I had a roommate, and he was kind of, probably when he came in, he was a lukewarm Christian. I was a lukewarm Muslim, and we became roommates. And during our time in college, we both kind of had a religious revival within ourselves. And I became more and more interested in Islam, and he became more and more interested in Christianity. And he got into this group of fundamentalist Christians that were active on campus. And I remember he and his friends, they would kind of their pitch for Christianity was that accepting Jesus Christ as your Savior gives you a certainty of salvation. And once you accept this, faith alone, right? That's the Protestant kind of cornerstone of Protestantism, is that faith alone can lead to salvation. So if you have faith, then you're guaranteed. There's no doubt that you're going to heaven. And they say, do you have such certainty? And the answer is no, we don't. And that's the ideal that Islam puts forth, that the day that I feel certain that I'm going to heaven is the day that I can really be certain I'm going to hell. It's the arrogance that it takes to have that kind of certainty, to now judge yourself and take that prerogative of God's to judge and now carry that out on yourself and decide that you are deserving of heaven, is such a manifestation of arrogance that in fact it goes against the very foundation of what it means to be a servant of God, which is the ideal for a Muslim. A servant and a slave never speaks for the master, never puts words in the master's mouth and makes decisions for him. He works as hard as he can, hoping that the master will be pleased and will toss him something in appreciation of whatever meager work he's done. And if the master turns around and pats him on the back, then the slave is ecstatic because he's gotten that much attention from the master. That's the metaphor that's used for the Muslim in relation to God. There are a couple of texts that I wanted to share with you that kind of embody this idea. There's one verse from the Quran. The Arabic says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْتُونَ مَا آتَوْا وَقُلُوبُهُمْ وَجِلَةٌ أَنَّهُمْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ رَاجِعُونَ. So it's praising people who are believers, and it says that one of their characteristics is that when they give charity, we take that as an example, when they give charity, when they do something good, they do it, but all the while that they're doing it, they have their heart is, let's say, like they have butterflies in their stomach. They don't know, they're concerned and worried because they know that at the end of the day they're going to be standing in front of God at judgment, and they're going to have to find out whether or not this was accepted. They did the act. They gave the charity. They did whatever they're supposed to do, and that's great. But the thought process, or what do you call it, like the attitude that they have towards that deed of theirs is one of uncertainty, because they're not their own judge. They're going to have to stand in front of Allah, and He will judge them and say that yes, that was acceptable, or no, there are these problems. I'm not going to accept it. And that's His prerogative. We can't complain against Him and appeal the decision. There's no higher court. So that's an ideal then. That's something that's distinct, I think, about Muslims, and should be something that we capitalize on. A similar phrase. There's a famous supplication. Some of you might be familiar with it. This is from Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali. So this is he's also known as Zayn al-Abidin. He's the fourth of the Shiite Imams. So he has the history is hard, but he lived in a very kind of a time of great oppression right after Karbala. And one of the ways he was able to speak and kind of do what he wanted to do was to cloak his teachings in the form of private supplications. That was benign enough. He's sitting in the mosque making supplications and these sorts of things. They thought, oh, he's like a Sufi. He's kind of, he's not dangerous anymore, so let's leave him alone. And he was able to kind of divert the attention of the authorities by doing this. But in the process, he creates this whole canon of supplications that are full of incredible ideas that really kind of start to rekindle the spirit of Islam after Karbala, and finally leads to his son and his grandson's success as great teachers in the Mosque of Medina with literally thousands of students. So two lines I want to share that kind of feed into the same theme of having this uncertainty with respect to our deeds. In the supplication, it's known as Dua Abi Hamza Thumari. This is a supplication that Imam Sajjad, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, narrated to one of his companions named Abu Hamza. So these are two phrases from that. The supplication says, لَا تَكِلُوا فِي النَّجَاةِ مِنْ عِقَابِكَ عَلَى أَعْمَالِ عَلَى أَعْمَالِ بَلْ بِفَضْلِكَ عَلَيْنَا لِأَنَّكَ أَهْلُ التَّقْوَى وَأَهْلُ الْمَغْفِرَةِ. So he says, I don't put my reliance, like for my salvation, I don't put my reliance on my own deeds. So I don't expect that it's through my deeds that I'm going to get salvation. Rather, my reliance is on your grace. It's only through your grace, if you choose to allow me to be saved, then I have a hope. But if it's just me, then I have no hope of my own. That's just that kind of declaration of complete poverty. I do my best, I'm doing good. I think one of the things I remember having in that's the discussion with my roommate was kind of, if you have that sort of guarantee, then what happens? What kind of a life do you live then? If I know for a fact that because I accept this one particular tenet, I'm guaranteed paradise, then what's the point in doing stuff? What's the point in praying and doing good deeds and stuff like that? It completely saps your motivation and your incentive to do anything then. They have a justification for how like once you have this faith, then it manifests itself and you become good, you do good, but really there's no motivation left because you're guaranteed salvation. So one of the things that this belief that Islam inculcates in us does is it maintains that incentive for us to improve ourselves continuously and always strive for better. Never to be satisfied and say, okay, I'm done now, I can rest on my laurels and I'm basically guaranteed, so I don't have to do anymore. One other phrase, also from the same dua, he says, عَظُمَ يَا سَيِّدِي أَمَلِي وَسَاءَ عَمَلِي. So we're speaking to Allah, oh my master, my hopes are great, but my actions are wanting. فَأَعْطِنِي مِنْ عَفْوِكَ بِمِقْدَارِ أَمَلِي وَلَا تُؤَاخِذْنِي بِأَسْوَأِ عَمَلِي. So, oh Allah, forgive me to the degree that I have hope that you'll forgive me, and don't hold me accountable for my actions because they're wanting and even evil. So if you base your judgment on me and my actions, then I'm lost. But if it's based on your grace and your generosity and those qualities of yours, then there's hope for me. فإن كرمك يجل عن مجازات المذنبين وحلمك يكبر عن مكافأة المقصرين وأنا يا سيدي عائد بفضلك حارب منك إليك. Let me skip to this last part. حارب منك إليك. That's also a beautiful phrase. It's taken from فَفِرُّ إِلَى اللَّهِ, that sort of Quranic imagery as well. That I'm fleeing from you to you. حارب منك إليك. I'm scared of you because of my own deficiency, and you're just, so I'm afraid of your justice. But at the same time, I have nowhere to go except back to you. So I flee from your justice, and I come back to you, beseeching your mercy and your grace. So this manifests itself, this idea of having this kind of uncertainty, inherent or continuous uncertainty about the acceptance of our deeds and our ability to follow the path that we know is right because of our intellect, this leads to a great degree of humility. In addition to the motivation and the incentives that are there, but this should lead to a great deal of humility as well in a Muslim, and no matter how good they may be. There's a phrase I want to share with you from another tradition. This is from the 7th Imam, Imam al-Kadhim. He says, he deems the few good deeds of others to be great. He's speaking about someone who is rational, who uses his intellect and kind of follows through with whatever his intellect dictates. So one of the qualities that he puts a finger on is that a person like this deems the few good deeds of others to be great, and deems his own many good deeds to be naught. Right? So a person who, just think how well we know ourselves and how well we know others. Right? You do a good deed, then I might do a good deed. All I see is the goodness and the shell of your good deed. I don't know what your intention is. I don't know how devoted you were to Allah, but there's a good chance that the intention was good, your beliefs are good, everything's good. So the heart of that deed and the spirit of that deed is outstanding. And we have but on the other hand, if I look at my own deed, I know exactly how weak my beliefs are. I know exactly how wrong my intention might have been, how much I might have been doing that deed to garner your praises instead of doing it for the sake of God and these kinds of things. And so I know all of my own imperfections. I have no knowledge of your imperfections. So the result of that, the rational conclusion of that, is that your deeds are better than my deeds, and you are better than I am. Your deeds are many, and my deeds are few, because really what I'm left with is nothing. He believes in his heart that all people are better than he, and that he is the worst of them. Right? One of our scholars, he explained this phrase. He said that if I were to look at a young person, then my thought process should be, as a rational person, should be that this young person, they've had so many fewer years to sin against God than I have. Right? And if you look at an older person who's older than you, you say he's had so many more years to do good deeds and worship God and serve God than I have. Right? If you look at an ignorant person who has less knowledge than you say he's going to be forgiven. Ignorance is an excuse. He doesn't have the knowledge, so he's not held to the same standard as I might be. And so I'm lost, and this person, he's going to get off scot-free because it was ignorance that led him to do whatever he did. And as someone who has more knowledge, their deeds, they know more, they can do more, they can act more, they can benefit more. The quality of their deeds is going to be greater because the knowledge that backs those deeds up is going to be greater. So to have that kind of thought process. This is not just for normal people. He's talking about the ideal. This is the way the Prophet would think, the Imams would think. All right, so that's an important manifestation that certainly we can practice this manifestation in realizing that we ourselves, or I myself, am not living up to that. Right, to have that kind of humility and that kind of uncertainty constantly, to even entertain the possibility that our deeds may not be acceptable to God. Okay, one third manifestation. A Muslim is appropriately, that's important, appropriately severe and compassionate. Right, a lot of times when we think of a person who's religious, I think this, I don't know different religions have this ideal, this distorted ideal. I've gotten it from Christian people. I'd say Christian people, not to attribute it to the religion itself. And even I think Muslims, sometimes we also reflect the same idea, where we think that being religious means being kind only, always. Always kind, always compassionate, always patient, just always only good and fluffy and warm and kind. And that, for instance, anger or fighting or punishment and these kinds of things are not good. They somehow, they're weaknesses, they're evil, and these kinds of things. I remember one talk in this one university, this one Christian girl, she said, I think I had given an introduction to Islam, and she asked me, how can you claim that your prophet's infallible when he fought wars? And so in her mind, I realized that there was a contradiction between those terms. To fight, to wage a war, was somehow evil, sinful, and someone who's all good would never do something like that. So I think that kind of conception is sometimes we take that for granted. We think that a religious person necessarily is only good and kind and soft and warm, and that's not the ideal. So there's a verse in the Quran to back this claim up. So there's in Surah Al-Fath, there's a verse at the end that talks about our Prophet and his companions. It says, Muhammadur Rasulullah walladina ma'ahu ashidda'u ala al-kuffar ruhama'u baynahum. That Muhammad, the Messenger of God, and those who are with him, they have these two characteristics. They are severe with the rejectors of Islam, and they are kind and compassionate and merciful with amongst themselves. Now, let me just clarify this as well. So, kuffar in the Quran generally refers. It doesn't like in our kind of common usage of the word kafir. It simply means anyone who's not a Muslim, right? Whether they happen not to be a Muslim and they haven't really thought about it, or whether they're staunch enemies of Islam. They're still kafir is kind of a general term for that. But in the Quranic usage, generally, maybe even always, I haven't seen if it's always, but generally it uses the word kafir, alladhina kafaru, for those people who are rejectors of Islam. Right? So somebody who's simply born into another faith and hasn't yet thought about it or hasn't been exposed properly to Islam is not kind of one of these enemies of God and these kinds of things that the Quran speaks about. They are people who are still, they have a high level of ignorance and if they don't make the effort to learn, then they'll be accountable for their ignorance. But if it's just a matter of fact that they've been born in a place, in a time, in a family, in a circumstance where they haven't been exposed properly to Islam, then they're not these staunch enemies, but they just have a level of ignorance that's prevented them from believing. So this verse is saying then that there's, and this is the Prophet himself, the role model for us, that he has these two qualities of not just being always warm and cuddly and merciful. He's like that appropriately, but then appropriately he's also he's also shadid. He's also severe, where that needs to happen. So deciding where and when and how, what the parameters are, that's a different question. But I wanted to just mention that that's also one of the ideals that, and we can think of them of God Himself. Right? God Himself, His attributes are not all warm and fuzzy. Yes, He's compassionate and kind and merciful, but He's also shadidul iqab, the one who punishes severely. He's also the al-muntaqim, the avenger. Right? Not arbitrarily. That's the key. It's not arbitrary that sometimes He has this mood and sometimes He has that mood. Right? He's all wise. He chooses carefully. He's all knowing, and He does things not emotionally like we might, but because this is the best thing. And if He is that, we are also called on to be manifestations to, in some very kind of small and trivial way, manifestations of God's attributes. Then we should also reflect and be reflections of those opposite attributes in their appropriate context. And then let me speak about one more manifestation. This is also an interesting one. So a Muslim, this is I think it's the fifth one I've talked about, or fourth one I've talked about, is an active participant in his own destiny. A Muslim is an active participant in deciding his own destiny. So this is also, I think, an interesting thing that we don't always realize. And I think even some of the other schools of Islam, as far as what I understand from the Sunni school as well, they may not accept this particular idea. And sometimes it's misunderstood, and they think that the Shias have some sort of a distorted idea about what destiny and fate are. So the idea is that Allah is the one who decides. Right? He decides our fate. So take an example. He decides, for instance, how much sustenance that's going to come my way in the coming year. So He decides that, but the way He decides it is with contingencies. Right? He decides that with contingencies that are now in my jurisdiction to avail myself of. So He'll decide, for instance, that Rizwan is going to be poor for this coming year, and his income is going to be $20,000 this year, because I want to, for whatever reason, I want to give him a taste of poverty this year. So I'm going to give him a hardship. But there's certain contingencies that He programs into that in his determination, in His decree, where He Himself decides that if this Ridwan, if he fulfills his obligations to me and fulfills all of his duties that He has to me, then I'll increase that to some degree. Or if he's, for instance, if he's good to family members, there's a family member he's on bad terms with, if he goes and reaches out to that family member and tries to reconnect with that person and ameliorates those ties, then I'm going to increase his sustenance and add another $10,000 to what he'll be able to have and lift him out of poverty, for instance. And all these different contingencies are there, and then it's up to me to avail myself of those things, to be good to family, or to cut off more family members and lose even some sustenance that he determined for me. So this is the Shi'i conception of how fate occurs, how Allah decrees things. He's completely powerful. He has all power to. He could just impose it on us if he wanted to, but he's programmed it in such a way that it leaves room for me to have a role in determining the final outcome of my destiny. What this leads to, imagine if that wasn't the case. If it was a case that God just decides and then that's it. There's no room for anything. Then again, that incentive is gone. If he decides that I'm going to be poor, if he decides that I'm going to be sick, and that's the end of there's no objection to that, then what's the point in praying for increased sustenance? What's the point in praying for health? Right, it really saps all motivation, and it cuts away that intimate connection and constant connection that we want to have, that He wants us to have with Him as our Creator, as the provider of everything that we have. So He's programmed the system in such a way that at the same time it maintains His sovereignty. He has all power to do whatever He wants, but He has now, out of His grace, given me a little bit of a say, so I can, if I pray and beg for increased sustenance, He'll change His determination and He'll increase my sustenance if He accepts that prayer. If I do this and that, then I can affect my destiny. Right? So that gives me now this kind of a partnership. I'm definitely the weak partner in this partnership, but it's a partnership that's been granted by God to allow us to also have a say in this. And it gives us then that incentive to act, to try to avail ourselves of these things. So the more we can fulfill our duties, the more of those benefits we can avail ourselves of. Those contingencies will kick in. The more I pray and ask Him and beg Him for betterment, for ease, for health, and all these things, then also He'll change that decree that He made. The Quran refers to this, يَمْحُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيُثْبِتُ. Right? It's literally a wide erase board. Right? That's the way the Quran also talks about it. Yamhu Allah, He wipes clear what He wants, and He writes what He wants. So like when He writes that $20,000 for Rizwan Arastu, right? That's on a wide erase board, and then there are all sorts of contingency factors there that I can then avail myself of, and if I do, then He'll erase that, and He'll write in 30,000, or erase it and go down to 10,000, right? And He'll adjust it based on now what I do. So it empowers us to now act and take this kind of initiative to modify and change our own destiny. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. I got the time notification as well. I didn't look at my watch. So let me just recap. So the 4 manifestations that I touched on. One was that a Muslim acts based on intellect and reason, and acts and believes everything. Belief and act and everything is based on reason. The second one was that a Muslim is certain of his path, but he's uncertain of his or her ability to live up to that, and uncertain of his success in following that path. And then the third was that a Muslim is appropriately severe and compassionate in wherever that's needed. And then the last one was that a Muslim takes this active stance in being a partner in determining his destiny by the grace of God, only because God has given us that ability to make that decision. So I guess if there are questions about the topic, I can address those. How much time do we have for Q&A?
So around 15 minutes?
15, 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Okay, go ahead. Take it back.
Yeah, I have a question. So theoretically, this is all sound very nice and very good. Do you have any idea why practically this was never translated to our societies, or not here but back home?
Not even back home, here, right now, in this room, like me. That is the problem. That's the reality of it. I think one of the problems is the way we think about religion. We think that it should be like the way we think of the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha. It says "Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim." And the way we think usually of Sirat al-Mustaqim, this straight path that we're asking God to guide us to, we think of the straight path as a destination, when it's a path. The thing we're asking God to guide us to is a path, not a destination. Right? So we're asking Him to get us onto the right path so that we can traverse this path. And my point is that the whole process of being a Muslim, acting as a Muslim, and it's a constant process that won't end until we take our last breath. And so we don't have to kind of throw our arms up and say it's hopeless because I haven't done it until now and it's too far-fetched and I can't do it. it's a process, and if I give up, then I've lost. I've gotten myself off the path. I forfeited from being on the path. But if I get on the path and do my best and trip and stumble and lose the path and get back and keep on somehow finding my way back on and keep on going forward, then I'm successful. However far I can get down that path towards God.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that theoretically this has been our theory for at least 1,400 years, right? So how come practically this theory was never put to practice?
And can you be more specific? Because it is constant. We're like the ethical issue of
No,
having
for example,
ability.
intellect. Your first part of your
Ask an
speech
intellect.
was about intellect, and you gave an example that if you pray all night, but then if you know that if you sleep all night and then you'll be more productive next day, then that would be even better for you physically and as far as
depending
rewarding.
on what meetings you have the next day. So
Right, for example, going to class or discovering a new medicine for humanity.
So is that usually the option? It's not always, at least
So
for me,
what-
like it might be on a Saturday morning, for instance, when I have the option of doing something useless or
Right.
Right,
No,
so if that's
no,
the case, then it's better to
yeah,
stay by
you're
night
right.
and pray.
You're right. But I'm taking the extreme case.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that how come it seems like for me maybe I'm not too educated on that part, but it seems to me that in our societies, like say I'm taking Iran or any other Muslim society, this is not practiced. We theoretically come and say all the time that Islam says this, Islam says that, but we never practice it the way it should.
Yeah.
And then,
I feel like you're talking absolutes that aren't true. These are personal struggles. These are ideals that we're all striving to. And just because we haven't been, or I haven't been completely successful, or you haven't been successful in living up to those ideals, doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. And
no, I never say it's a lost cause. On the contrary, I say it's great theory. But I'm saying, why doesn't it ever translate? Why
we're
is
not working
it?
hard enough. So that's your homework and my homework. That we work harder to implement some of these ideals and all the other ideals that are out there, and do our best to try to.
There's a question over there. And then
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your lecture. My question is concerning the first point that you made.
Can you speak up a bit?
Sorry, the first point that you made about rationality. So going back to that point about not sleeping the night instead of waking up to pray in order to do certain things. My question is basically, does rationality contradict ishq, or like love for Allah? So in that sense, I remember listening to a lecture about like asceticism. So in Islam, you have this tension between asceticism and moderation, right? So one of the arguments is, well, if you're going to be ascetic, then do it out of pure love and not just because you're sort of calculating a bonus that you're going to get out of the rewards, right? But then if you're doing that, then you're not being really rational in your worship anymore, right? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? So is there a tension in that sense between performing out of love and performing out of this rational approach to religion?
So I think the dichotomy between asceticism and moderation is not the right dichotomy. The dichotomy is between asceticism and extravagance.
Okay.
The middle ground is moderation.
Mm-hmm. But if Islam asks us to be moderate, right, but we have hadiths saying that our role models were ascetic in many different practices, then in that sense it's difficult to reconcile.
Yeah. So, like the conception we have of asceticism, especially in the school of the followers of the Bayt, the concept we have of asceticism is not one of renouncing the world. The idea is to not be attached to the world and to be indifferent to the world.
Okay.
So you can be Solomon and have the wealth of the world at your fingertips, and still be ascetic because you could care less whether you have it or don't have it. As long as you have it, you'll use it and be thankful for it, and if you don't have it, then you'll deal. That's asceticism, not actually giving up everything or renouncing the world and going off in a cave. That's not only is that not an ideal, that's wrong and shirking responsibility, and it's a cop out. So even the Prophet ﷺ, his way of doing that was to escape temporarily for days at a time, right? Not to go and abandon society and go live in a cave, but to spend enough time on his own to reflect and do what he needed to do in terms of personal worship and personal building, and then be with people, and gather strength to be able to deal with people. So there's the moderation. Then that's the hard thing, trying to decide what are the parameters to reach that moderation. And that's where the intellect has to play a role. So even like, for instance, like, so Imam Ali alayhi salam is kind of an ideal in this way. He lived an extremely ascetic life in that way, even in terms of like not having much material wealth, giving kind of very generously. But though, if he had done such a thing, like for instance, in some cases he had access to wealth. Like this is pretty standard for all of the imams. They had access to wealth. They owned a lot, but they didn't keep it. They didn't use it. And the Prophet also, they had swaths of land, agricultural land, and booty from war, and these kinds of things in their access. But they would give it away pretty systematically. If he were to do something like that and his family suffered unwillingly, then that would be unjust of him and that would be wrong. So for me, for instance, if I happen to be, I feel like I want to give away all my money, but as a result, my wife and my kids are going to suffer, then that's wrong for me to do. That's unjust to them. I can, whatever my share of my wealth is, whatever I'm going to eat today, I can give that away, but I can't take food out of their mouths unless they themselves are willing. Right? And so that's the case with his family, Imam Ali's family. Like, there's a famous story that's narrated, that's kind of pointed at in Surah Al-Insan, where they're fasting. Right? Imam Ali and his family are fasting, and at the end of the day, when they're about to break their fast, an orphan, and then a subsequent day, a captive and a poor person, they come successively and they ask. And not only does Ali give his iftar that he was going to break his fast with, but his whole family does. Even the kids, who are very young at that time, even they voluntarily give up their iftar and they go to sleep hungry those 3 nights. Right? So that was a willing. The whole family was willing to forego their right. Right? So that's still keeping within that moderation, because they're doing they're making sure they're fulfilling their obligation and duties first. Right? So that's the rational part. And only then do they kind of eat into their own personal rights and these sorts of things. Right? Do you see how that plays into it? So it's to have complete abandon and say, like, I'm going to manifest my love for God by renouncing the world and just praying to Him all the time. That's not the right way. There are huge criticisms for people like that. There's one hadith from, I think it's from the 6th Imam, where somebody comes and he prays. He says, "I have a brother, and my brother is always praying. Mashallah, he's a great person. He's always praying." And the Imam asks, "Who supports him?" And he says, "I do. I work and I make sure he has enough money to support himself, and he prays." The Imam says, "You get more reward than he does. His rewards it's paltry compared to what you're getting. You're fulfilling your obligation, your duty. You're taking care of your brother. That's much more valuable than him spending all his time praying."
Thank you so much. My question again is about the first point that you made on the Muslim is intellectually driven and he needs the evidence to back up the reason to believe in God to begin with. But yet our two fundamentals of believing in a God and where we are going after the death is something that we cannot use our intellectual based on the evidence that we have. Even if we have it today, we didn't have it 400 years ago. The way that I think of how God can write a scene, seeing it visualization by computer, would be very hard for somebody seeing it like 1400 years ago. But I think it's a contradiction. Sometimes my feeling is that we like to say, yes, Muslims are intellectually driven, but at a certain point is that what evidence would support me that where I'm going after the death? If you say that's a vegetable that grows, that's a vegetable, we are different, right? There are materials that we see that they die forever. It's radioactive materials. They die forever. They don't go back to the first. Why we are not in there from that materials? Who says that we are not? So I don't think that Islam actually, maybe inside the realms of Islam, intellectual or, as I say, exactly act, would affect the play a main role. But before to begin and to get it, you at a certain point you have to. At least for me, it seems that I born Muslim, and if I don't go after, it's like I stay like that, and no one can just even if I don't pray and doesn't do anything, no one cannot say, "Oh, you're not Muslim." I'm born Muslim, so I don't see where we exactly put the app over here. It says for me, sometimes we take it too high, and sometimes it's difficult to solve the problem. We push it back and say, okay, now it's not your place, because you're gonna ask a dangerous question that mess up with your own way of thinking. So I found it's very.
So I understood 2 points there. One is that there are levels of argumentation or evidence now that we have for the existence of God that weren't there in the past, and so there's a difference in the strength of the argumentation now versus before. So that's not saying that there wasn't proof or there wasn't a rational way of reaching God before and now there is. It's simply that there's a continuum, and yes, we might uncover kind of more evidence and reach a greater level of understanding of the natural world, for instance, as scientific discovery advances, and that is true.
I mean, if you believe that, then it's. I said maybe it's opposite. It's right now the scientific evidence. How does it support rationally that having a creature, and not believing in the evolution?
Right.
If I am supposed to back that up, then I have still a greater question that unsolved is where I'm going.
Right.
Because it's science that can't actually touch it because it's not testable for science.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Let me jump to the second question, and I'll see if I can come back to this first one and this other one. So the second one, you're saying, what about resurrection or judgment? How can we rationally prove that? So saying that, the way I presented it, I'm saying that we need something outside of revelation to get our foot in the door of revelation. So from the front end, to get to the point where we can now benefit from a revealed text or revealed teachings, right? That doesn't mean, and that's certainly not the case, that intellect can then therefore reach and understand and attain all the teachings of religion. That's certainly not the case, right? There's a role for intellect to get us into faith, and then there's a continued role for intellect to help us to understand revealed text and then apply that, right? But that independent role of intellect to be able to understand truth is limited to some small, it's not small things, but some certain areas. Belief in God, verification of the text, and establishment of, for instance, Prophet Muhammad as a prophet. So just like some of those fundamental beliefs are what we can get to kind of with pure reason, not to all the beliefs of Islam. Otherwise, there would really be no reason for God to send revelation in the first place. He would just say, it would be one line, think, and that would be it. And then he would hold us accountable at the end of the day for having thought or not thought and practice all of Islam. So intellect is a necessary ingredient, but it's not a sufficient ingredient. It has to be coupled. It's kind of like it gives us the faculty to get into religion, and then the faculty to be able to understand revealed text, which then, in combination with the revealed text, gives us all the guidance that we need. The question of evolution is an important one, and that in itself is going to be a whole discussion, but let me see if I can just address it like this in brief. So, there's one of the proofs for God's existence that's spoken about both by Muslims and since Thomas Aquinas, at least in Christian circles as well, is the teleological argument, right, from order, that there is order, therefore there must be an orderer. So traditionally, this has been used as an independent proof that there is a God. My understanding now, and I think this is. There are others who also have this understanding, is that it's not an independent proof for the existence of God. Rather, the existence of God has to be established by another proof, an ontological proof that says that the world is, everything that we know is contingent. It requires something that is independent and not contingent to be able to bring this into existence. Because a contingent being it can't come into existence if it's contingent, without something else causing it to. The fact that it's contingent means it's dependent on something else. So there must be something else that itself is independent to create this contingent being. Otherwise, you'd end up with an infinite regress. So that argument, I said very quickly and all, but that kind of argument, some other argument has to come in place to show us that there is definitely a creator. The teleological argument, the role that plays is it gives us a sense of what are some of the qualities of that creator. So from the cosmos that I observe, if I understand, for instance, that there's a high level of energy and power, then that gives me some sense of the power of the creator. If there's complexity and intricacy and all these systems are there, then it gives me a sense of his knowledge and his wisdom and how he's able to create this sort of a thing. So it gives us an insight into some of those attributes of God, not the fact that there's a creator. And so what evolution has been able, the theory of evolution has been able to do is been able to help us to understand how we can have at least biological diversity and complexity without having God come in and tweak things on a constant basis. He doesn't have to keep on recreating things and creating new species and stuff like that. He created a complex enough system that would continue to propagate itself and would continue to adapt to the changing circumstances of the world as time went on. That, coupled with the fact that we know now that there's a creator who created this whole system, actually feeds into this conception that this creator who created such a system is so complex and so amazingly self-sustaining is a lot more intelligent than I previously understood. So just to the contrary, it doesn't say that we don't need a God. Now it says that God that I already know exists based on a different proof. Now I understand to a greater degree how incredible his knowledge is. So anyway, that's the short answer. I know you have, your face says you have a lot of questions about that, but maybe we'll continue the discussion with others and have
So we have time only for two more questions.
Thank you so much for the talk. I was wondering, like, what practical exercise or steps would you suggest in order to intellectually start rationalizing religion? Because a lot of the time, we do actions, but they're not intellectually based. We just do them because we've seen people do them, and we do them because we feel good. But they don't really have an intellectual basis, or if there is, we are not using that to justify our actions. Any small exercises, steps that would help us start rationalizing our worship?
I don't think there's no simple process. It's not like I can teach you some yoga move and all of a sudden you'll be. So it's a rational process, and a rational process takes thought. Like being able to, like, just for me to be able to understand what I just talked about, it took me so much effort and so much time and so much study and so much discussion. And even this is probably incomplete, and you know, down the road, someone, like, his objection is going to strengthen me a little bit, and maybe someone else will object to something and show some other hole that I have to plug up, and then through that discursive process, things get stronger. My idea, what I did for myself, I had to kind of recreate my own belief system. I was born into an Ismaili Bora family, and then in college I came in contact with some international Shias, and I grew up with Sunnis and Wahhabis, and so I had all these different things, and I decided consciously to become a Shia. And then I went into the seminary and basically had to recreate my whole belief system from scratch because I had nothing to go on from before. And so my own process, I've tried to recreate for students that I teach, and to try to build up this edifice of belief from strong foundations of reason first, to get, like I just mentioned, to get to those levels. And then every other block that you put on, make sure that there's now evidence for why you're doing that. Either rational evidence or textual evidence that's been bolstered by reason. Right? So I'm going to accept the Quran. Why? Because I have now rational reasons for accepting the Quran based on the challenges the Quran has offered and the failure of people to fulfill those challenges and those sort of things. So now, through a rational process, I established that the Quran is, yes, the word of God. Now I can use, after I've built up that process, now I can open up the book and take verses and start understanding them and applying them, because it's part of that system. But if I just take that leap of faith and say, well, I'm just a Muslim and this is my book, and so I just have to learn from it, then the whole foundation on which you're opening the book and reading is so weak that as soon as someone pulls out a little stick, the whole thing collapses. And that's what happens when you have these crises of faith, because everything's built on very weak foundations. And that same process has to happen. I think there are five kind of watershed beliefs that we have to deal with in this rational way. One is the belief in God. One is the question of whether or not the Quran and therefore the Prophet is truly from God. A third one is what happens after the Prophet. And when he dies, what's after that? Is there succession appointed by the Prophet or is there not? That's the question that has to be answered. A fourth one, I thought there was a fifth one too. The fourth one is, at least for Shi'is, we have these 12 imams, and then after the 12th imam, what happens? And how do we establish the system of ijtihad and taqlid? So anyway, those are four critical questions that a person has to deal with and tackle, and if you were able to get those successfully and understand them, then it leads to a whole slew of consequences. And if you get stuck on one of those, or you find out that one of those is false and you reject it, then you can basically reject Islam altogether and go and try to find truth somewhere else.
Someone who has a degree in evolutionary biology, that discussion, I don't have any problem with like believing in creator and accepting like the theory of evolution as a scientific fact. But like there are certain stories or like references in Quran or hadiths that contradicts that theory, like the creation of Adam. There's a like clear contradiction between that and like what biologists say.
Yeah.
How do you like?
So that's the one critical. So I have to give my evolution spiel, but I what can I say without saying too much? So it's dangerous and it's I think intellectually dishonest as well. This trend that we have sometimes to try to justify Islam through science and say whatever science says, that's what Islam says, and whatever Islam says, science must say. Right? There's authentic religious text that, as a Muslim will say, is not going to be contradicted by authentic scientific finding, data, facts that are found scientifically. But there are spurious religious kind of myths and legends that we have that could very well be falsified by empirical data. And there are also conclusions that are drawn by scientists based on real hard data, but conclusions that themselves are spurious that can also be falsified and be in contradiction with Islamic text. Right? Islamic text, the Quran in particular, doesn't. I've never found anything to contradict. That's the most we can say. It doesn't contradict the possibility that there's an evolutionary process that has led to diversification, speciation of all organisms, including human beings, once initial creation has taken place. There's not even anything far-fetched to say that life could have been created through an inorganic process in the what is it called, the primordial soup, and those kind of some sort of theory like that. That's not even far-fetched, and that's perfectly in keeping with an Islamic worldview that God is the creator, because we don't believe that God is kind of not necessarily a direct creator of things, that he's sitting there and he says kun, and all of a sudden this creature pops up, right? He might express it like that just because he wants to be simplistic, and that's what a lot of people understand. But that doesn't necessarily mean that scientifically that's the way. It's an expression that he's using to show his connection to the creation and his causality in that creation, but it could very well be through a process. There's a famous hadith, Allahu an yujiyahu illa bi asbabiha. Allah does things through processes. He doesn't, normally at least, he doesn't provide, for instance, sustenance miraculously. For Mary, that was an exception. There's exceptions on miracles that happen, but for the most part, if I pray for sustenance and he answers my prayer, it's not going to come as, Canadian plastic dollars raining from the sky. I say plastic because we don't have plastic money in America. It's going to happen through other natural means. So I don't see any contradiction between those two aspects of the evolutionary theory. The only place where I've seen I think there's a stark, or what do you call it, the Quran adamantly says no, is the creation of Adam. And that too is the verse from Surah Ali Imran. I don't remember the number, but it's the one. It's from. It's right before Ayatul Mubahala, where it says, مثل عيسى عند الله كمثل آدم خلقه من تراب ثم قال له كن فيكون. So the context of the verse is that these Christians from Najran have come up to debate with the Prophet and see whether he's a true prophet or not. And in the course of the discussions, the priest of the Christian says, what do you say about Jesus, his birth? And the Prophet says he's born of a mother and no father. And the priest says, have you ever seen that happen? Or has that ever happened before? And if it hasn't, then you have to admit that he's not a human being like all other human beings. All humans are born of a father and a mother. He only had a mother. And so the Quran comes down, and the verse comes down and says, if you think Jesus is a God because he has only a mother, then what about Adam? He should be even a greater God because he has neither mother nor father. So that's the verse doesn't say it explicitly, but between the lines, that's what it's saying. That's the argument that it's giving. That if you think Jesus is a God, then Adam must be a God too, right? And so that implied meaning is in direct contrast or conflict with an evolutionary origin to Adam. So that particular creation had to have been without mother and father in some miraculous way. But that's not to say that after Adam's creation, then we don't have evolution happening again. That's why we have all these colors around us, and all the diversification that we have amongst the human race, because there was no other creation after Adam. He's the only human. He and his wife are the only human beings created.
But is it also possible to interpret that verse in a way that, okay, even creation of Adam was through evolution?
Not this verse, I don't think. I can't find a way. The other verses that say that God created Adam out of clay, he created Adam out of water, those kinds of things, yes. Those can be figurative, and it's just part of the process.
They were like not human mother and father, they were like other species.
That's too far-fetched from the meaning of the verse.
It's a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much, Shaykh Arastu. We thank him. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.